Food is even shorter in Shanghai during its now week-long lockdown. That's led to a rare sight for China, people publicly protesting authorities. Many are tired of the lockdown, others are just desperately short on food. And just a warning, this story contains some graphic video.
A Shanghai resident yells in despair out her window. She's shouting, "Help us, we're close to starving to death. Help us now, we're really close to starving to death." A famine in China's richest city sounds unbelievable, but that's actually what's happening. A large number of Shanghai locals are facing the same situation as the woman. It's led to something rarely seen in Shanghai. Residents are gathering to protest against authorities in streets and from buildings. This last clip was from protests from Shanghai's Kangting district. A local there told us on the phone that it's not just her district that's seeing protests.
We really have little to eat. We really can't find any food to buy. I'm a pregnant woman as well. Last night, it wasn't only in Kangting district. Many neighborhoods were protesting. They all made a big commotion.
So what was the response to the protests? In one district, authorities sent a drone there to broadcast a message to residents. Just how desperate are some people for food? One Shanghai local called the police asking whether there would be food if he got himself arrested.
I'm not looking for trouble. I just want to ask, if I run outside now and you arrest me, will I have food to eat? I've had nothing to eat for 4 days. I only have tap water now.
Unfortunately for some, the situation was too much for them to bear. Footage shows a number of residents' motionless bodies on the ground after they chose to end their own life and jump off their apartment buildings. Don Ma, NTD News.
And the Biden administration Wednesday announced an additional $800 million in U.S. military assistance to Ukraine. Urban warfare expert and retired U.S. Army Major John Spencer says this time, instead of smaller things, the U.S. is sending artillery and artillery rounds.
In this phase, I think it is a shift in policy to say, absolutely, we recognize that Ukraine needs the ability to fight Russia in the open and to prevent basically their loss in eastern Ukraine, right? I think this is a shift in policy in recognizing the tools that are needed.
The Defense Department says the new security package includes 11 helicopters, 200 armed personnel carriers, and 18 howitzers.
And a howitzer is a very large artillery round that when it impacts, it can really hurt a military formation, even inside of a tank. Ukrainians need at this moment. They need to destroy the Russian convoys before they even get to the cities or near to the locations they want to take.
It's the first time the United States has sent howitzers. The latest package brings total U.S. aid to Ukraine to more than $2.5 billion, according to President Biden. Jessica Beatty, NTD News.
Over the weekend, we caught up with Eric Trump, son of the former president and executive vice president of the Trump Organization, while at the Reawaken America tour in Salem, Oregon. Eric touched upon why his father was able to maintain stability around the world during his time as president, all the while enduring constant fire from the press and his political adversaries back home. Here's what he had to say.
Eric Trump, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
It's good to be with you guys.
Eric, I want to ask you, why do you think that your father was able to maintain order during his time as president with all of these dictators around the world?
Yeah, it's very simple. It's called strength. People respected him. They respected the United States of America. They respected our military. They knew he was unconventional. They knew he was a little bit unpredictable. And he wanted them to know that. You know, when he started taking out guys like Soleimani, right? The Reaper drones and, all of a sudden bad guys start disappearing around the world. I think that sent a very big signal to a lot of people, which is don't mess with the United States of America, don't mess with their military, don't mess with, with Trump. He's willing to do this. Same thing with ISIS. I mean, they had a big terrorist camp on the top of a massive mountain. You'll remember this very well. He flies over, drops a Moab bomb on, and guess what? Those terrorists don't exist anymore. People knew that, don't mess with him. He'll use the strength of the United States. At the same time, he was a guy who didn't want to go to war. And so it really was kind of that peace through strength doctrine that we always talk about.
Now, Eric, I want to ask you, recently you probably have noticed that we're tapping into America's emergency oil reserves with an emphasis on emergency. What is your take on that?
Well, my take on is the strategic petroleum reserves, which is what it's called. I mean, they're really meant for a catastrophe, a world war where you need it. You need it for ships, you need it for your military, you need it for a lot of other things. They were, drastically depleted when my father was in office. Oil was at the cheapest prices in the history of the country, and so he took that opportunity to refill the strategic reserves. Now they just want to give stimulus out, so they want to drain those reserves only because they're not doing the Keystone XL pipeline. They're not drilling on federal lands. They've made it more difficult to actually extract oil and gas and all the other things that we know right now. So you're dipping into your strategic, reserves that are meant for kind of unthinkable times. That's why they were built, to try and cheapen oil and gas prices because of failed policies that this administration has put in. That's not the point of them. And by the way, it hardly makes a dent in the actual amount of oil that this country uses on a daily basis. And so it's disappointing. It shouldn't have happened. He should have kept building the pipeline. Keystone XL pipeline should have been built. And all his disastrous policies shouldn't be put in place, and you wouldn't have needed to actually tap into them. And I wish that's where we would have been.
So we've recently seen Hillary Clinton in her campaign. It's come to light that she spied on your father when he was in the White House. And does this raise deeper concerns about the deep state and potentially what she may have created as her time as Secretary of State?
I was the guy that got emails from the Washington Post and the New York Times when somebody planted out that the FBI was investigating Trump because they had a secret server with Trump Tower, between Trump Tower and Russia, which never existed. I mean, her people who were paid on her payroll went into the FBI, lied to the FBI, then went and planted that to the mainstream media in this country, which started the whole Russia collusion nonsense, which wasted literally 3 years of everybody's time. The media's time was a huge distraction for this country.
Eric, you mentioned the media. How damaged do you think the media is right now?
Yeah. Well, based on their approval ratings, really damaged because they've got a 7% approval rating in this country. It's horrible. It's people don't trust them anymore. If I did 1/100th of what Hunter Biden did, I'd be in jail for the rest of my life. Yet the mainstream media hasn't mentioned Hunter Biden's name in 258 days. There's a serious problem with that, right? I mean, they let him skirt by. They carry Joe Biden's water. Remember, you don't think they would have been trying to institute, Article 25 of the Constitution had my father said 1/100th of the stupid things, frankly, that Biden said? Of course they would have. But again, they're on that side, and they'll do anything to cover up for him and let him get away with just about anything under the sun. You don't have equal scales of justice in this country. You don't have equal media coverage. The media is owned. I mean, they are the propaganda wing of the left-wing party, and I think that's become very clear to all Americans.
Eric Trump, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thousands of flights were canceled or delayed worldwide over the weekend amid numerous reported issues. Spring Airlines and China Eastern saw the most cancellations. FlightAware data shows on April 9th, more than 2,400 flights were canceled and 9,100 were delayed worldwide. About 7,000 flight delays and over 2,200 cancellations were reported on April 10th. A JetBlue spokesperson says the company's own cancellations stem from severe weather, technical problems, and staffing issues. The airline says it will work to adjust flight schedules over the rest of the month. Alaska Airlines said in a statement the company's flight cancellations and delays are due to a shortage of pilots and heated talks between the airline and its pilots union. The company says it's doing its best to hire and train new pilots. A Southwest Airlines Twitter post says its April 9th flights were delayed or canceled because of an intermittent technology issue and ongoing weather challenges. About a week ago, thousands of weekend flights were canceled or delayed across the country because of similar issues.
Some investors and Wall Street banks have apparently benefited from the fact people are so desperate to sell the Russian debt holdings. They found what looks like, on the surface at least, a no-lose bet. Idris Khan Fredrickson has more.
Banks and Wall Street firms are still trying to profit off of Russia, despite the social atmosphere, and they're trying to do it by buying Russian debt.
The bonds were knocked down in value because of excessive selling, and so many were pressured in the United States and the West to liquidate any Russian holdings.
William Stack is the owner of Stack Financial Services. Stack says all the selling drove bond prices very low. Meanwhile, Stack believes it's highly unlikely Russia will default on that debt. Russia's debt to GDP ratio was around 18% in 2020.
You can literally buy something that normally costs $1 and you can buy it for 20 cents. And there is the possibility that years from now, that 20 cents may be actually worth a full $1 if they don't default. I mean, that's amazing, quadrupling possibly.
Don Kaufman is the co-founder of TheoTrade, an online financial education service. Kaufman says that they can still win if the bonds default.
The exact same time you can buy basically an insurance policy. That's what a credit default swap really comes down to.
Normally, there's no way to profit from buying insurance, but right now, Russian bonds are falling faster than the insurance. So in summary, default or not, the investors can make money, but other factors still make it risky.
This is not a safe trade. Even with the credit default swap on there, again, times of war can bring, untold risks.
Firms involved with this include Discovery Capital Management, Aurelius Capital Management, Golden Tree Asset Management, Silver Point Capital, and H2O Asset Management. Big banks like JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs are facilitating these trades.
It's simply a desire to make profit. And, before we point too many fingers, we have to keep in mind that their investment portfolios are owned by Americans, so we'd have to spread the guilt out to anyone that owns those funds as well.
JP Morgan representatives say that none of the trades violate sanctions or benefit Russia. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
A first for Taiwan's military. The island's defense force released a civil defense handbook for the first time on Tuesday. The handbook gives citizens survival guidance in a case of a war scenario. A Taiwan defense official further explained, saying the handbook provides information on how citizens should react during a military crisis and possible disasters to come. As the Russia-Ukraine war continues, the island is getting more attention, specifically how it should respond to Beijing's increasing pressure. Beijing claims the island as part of mainland China, though the island is governed by its own democratic constitution and leadership. Even still, China has never ruled out using force to control Taiwan and has stepped up military activities surrounding the island in the past 2 years. Taiwan's handbook details how to find shelter and supplies and offers tips for preparing emergency first aid kits. It uses comic strips and pictures to illustrate those details. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen is overseeing a broad modernization program to strengthen the island's forces. According to plans unveiled last year, Taiwan plans to reform training for its reserve forces. What's more, the government is looking to extend compulsory military service for citizens beyond the current 4-month requirement.
Russia's invasion of Ukraine is prompting Finland and Sweden to rethink life outside the NATO alliance. A majority of Finns, who share an 800-mile border with their Russian neighbors, already say they would sign up to the military alliance. Swedes are even more hesitant, but even there, nearly 60% would favor NATO membership, especially if Finland joins. Rachel Rizzo, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank, says they would be knocking at a fairly open door.
There are serious implications of Finland especially joining NATO. I mean, this means that the total land border between NATO territory and Russia would more than double. Right now, it's around 754 miles. If Finland joins, it will be nearly 1,600 miles. And so that's a significant change. But I think that NATO allies understand how significant the Russian invasion of Ukraine is and what it means for Euro-Atlantic security.
As close friends but non-members, technically Helsinki and Stockholm don't have the protection of NATO's guarantee that an attack on one ally is an attack on all. But they do regularly participate in defence training with NATO countries like Norway, and that brings certain benefits.
If Sweden or Finland came under attack by Russia, I do think that the alliance would be ready to respond, even though those two countries are not yet members. They work so closely with NATO in terms of exercises.
Both the Finnish and Swedish leaderships are reviewing their security policies and the prospect of life inside NATO. Finland will be ready in a matter of days. Swedish Foreign Minister Ann Linde told reporters recently that Stockholm is further behind.
We are not there. We have the analysis. We are not going to make any decision without a thorough analysis. That's how we work in Sweden. Thank you.
NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg has said it would be possible to allow Finland and Sweden in quite quickly. But the military alliance has not commented on what a fast-track process could look like or how soon.
In the German city of Cologne, consumers are trying to reduce their natural gas consumption at home. This, while the German government is in a tough spot between dependence on Russian energy and the war in Ukraine.
Like many other German households, Sebastian Zuger and his wife are working to cut back on their gas consumption. That's despite the country's reluctance to join the EU ban on Russian gas imports.
It was definitely a way to save on gas, to not use the gas stove but the induction plate. It's a very simple appliance which we also have in our weekend home, and we've only had positive experiences with it. Plus the coffee is ready much more quickly.
The couple wonders how else they could save on the use of natural gas.
We like to take a bath, which means using the gas-fired water heater, so there isn't really a possibility to save much on gas, except maybe if we don't wash ourselves anymore. But now we're thinking the gas-fired water heater is relatively new. What's the right thing to do? Do we throw it out? Should we install a heat exchanger?
Europe sources 40% of its gas from Russia, and Germany is one of the most dependent countries. Critics say that Russian energy dependence is funding the invasion of Ukraine. In another apartment in Cologne, Paolo Alimanta is preparing a meal for his daughters. He sees the current energy debate as an opportunity for renewable energy.
The pressure couldn't be heavier because a majority of Germans drive cars and because rent for people living in the city's apartments rose incredibly. I believe the government is now forced to get a lot of money very quickly and non-bureaucratically to get a lot of renewable energy into the country.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says the country may be able to end its imports of Russian oil within this year. But according to economic analysts, the decision could lead to a sharp economic downturn.
Governor Greg Abbott is staying true to his word. The first bus of illegal immigrants showed up in D.C. today, and there's more on the way. What happened after they arrived, and what's the plan for them next? NTD's Melina Weiskup was there when they arrived. Here's what she found out.
Just hours after arriving in Washington, D.C., a group of illegal immigrants is headed off to different U.S. cities. The people boarding this bus were headed to a Catholic charity in D.C., who's helping them buy tickets to travel to their final destinations.
Most of them do have family or friends in the place where they really want to go. We're happy to help them if they want to stay here. Most are choosing to move on. And so we're helping to buy tickets. We bought them food. They were hungry when they arrived. We have the gospel mandate to welcome the stranger.
One of the volunteers told NTD that they're helping because the city says they want no part of this. It's unclear if Texas's governor has the legal authority to transport these busloads of migrants to the U.S. Capitol. And the ones that took up Governor Abbott's offer came to D.C. voluntarily, after arriving in Texas just yesterday.
When we got to Texas, we had nothing because they had taken everything. We heard there was help and a bus to Washington, and there would be someone to facilitate travel because in Texas there is no help.
Right on this street is where that first bus of illegal immigrants was dropped off earlier this morning, about 30 of them were dropped off right here. And this location is quite interesting. Not only is it right at the doorstep of the U.S. Capitol, but it's also right in front of the Fox News building and the NBC building. And right down the street is Union Station, a popular traveling area here in D.C. where many of those immigrants went to kind of wait and figure out their next steps. We went and spoke to some of them to find out what their plans are now.
I want to go to Miami. We don't have anyone to receive us there. We don't know anyone. We are alone.
He's one of the few that are headed to Miami tonight. About 18 others stayed in D.C. with friends or family. Some now headed to New York. And they tell us their journey was long and rough.
In Mexico, they robbed us of everything. The cartels and the police. They took our money, our things. My family stayed in Monterrey, as it is difficult to travel without money. I decided to travel ahead and work to send for my family, because my wife is there, my 5-year-old son. We started the journey on January 7th. We've been walking, not in a plane or anything, walking little by little.
The point of sending them to D.C., Governor Abbott says, is to force the federal government to deal firsthand with the border crisis. This is only the first bus. Governor Greg Abbott says there's now another bus en route to D.C. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
In New Jersey, parents just got the newest update to their children's sex ed curriculum. And now some are worried for their kids and thinking about removing them from public schools. NTD's Evelyn Lee has more.
Starting in the fall of 2022, New Jersey schools will teach first and second graders about gender identity. The curriculum instructs teachers to tell their students that they might, for example, feel like they're a girl even if they have boy parts. I spoke to Angela Plowhead, a U.S. House candidate and psychologist. She says that these types of lessons are doing a disservice to children who don't question their gender. Instead, schools should address issues of bullying and mental health across the board versus just focusing on one specific group of people.
What we know about people with gender dysphoria is that it only affects about 0.005% of the population. But yet, it's being applied to the general population.
But some reason that these classes can create a safe space for kids to voice these kinds of thoughts and teach respect for others. But Plowhead disagrees. She says that she can't find a single study that shows gender-inclusive classes in the general population have this effect. Plowhead says the curriculum tells children to question their most stable characteristic, and that could be damaging to them.
I was just talking to someone 15 minutes ago that was telling me about a young woman who had never had concerns about what her sex was, and she started having issues of depression. And at the school, they were forcing her to think about, well, have you considered that maybe you're really a they? And until that happened, she had never had that question.
New Jersey State Senator Holly Schapisi received those class materials from concerned parents. She told Fox News she expects parents to fight back against the curriculum. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
Let's turn now to Beijing's controversial one-child policy. We'll hear from Reggie Littlejohn, president of Women's Rights Without Frontiers. She sheds light on the stories of those who'd lived through the policy firsthand. And just a warning, some viewers may find the following disturbing.
400 million baby boys and girls. That's more than the entire U.S. population. But these babies never saw the light of day. They were aborted under the Chinese Communist regime's one-child policy, some killed right after birth. The policy was introduced in 1980 and was active for decades after.
This was in the mid-90s, that the one-child policy was not voluntary, which is what the propaganda department was putting out, but was actually very brutally and coercively enforced.
Reggie Littlejohn is the founder and president of an international coalition called Women's Rights Without Frontiers. The organization strives to expose and oppose forced abortion, gendercide, and sexual slavery in China. Reggie Littlejohn is an attorney. After graduating from Yale, she began representing refugees who were seeking asylum in the U.S. She says one case really stood out to her.
One of them was forcibly sterilized, so meaning that she was picked up and dragged out of her home, screaming and crying, held onto a bed, and sterilized without anesthesia. So she said that this was unbelievably painful, like somebody holding a fire hose inside of her.
The woman ended up with permanent migraines, back pain, and abdominal pain, conditions she'll endure for the rest of her life. She's one of countless women that suffered the same fate. Through her YouTube channel, Little John describes another case she witnessed.
One case that I'll never forget is of a young woman who was 7 months pregnant without a birth permit. So that would be an illegal pregnancy, who was walking down the street, and she was grabbed by family planning cadres, dragged off the street, strapped down to a table, forced to abort the baby that she very desperately wanted.
And after the tragic procedure was over,
one of the medical personnel came to her with the body of her aborted baby and said, "You need to pay for this so that we can dispose of the body." And she said she didn't have any money, so they just laid that body right next to her in the bed. And I've got a photograph of her looking down and just grieving the loss of this 7-month-old baby that was forcibly aborted.
China has put limits on family size since the Chinese Communist Party took the power in 1949, long before the one-child policy took effect. And even though the controversial policy ended in 2016, the consequences are still felt today. For one, it's led to major imbalance in the population. China has a far greater number of males than females. That problem is rooted in another issue, gendercide. That's when families prefer baby boys over baby girls, largely because sons will take on the responsibility of caring for their parents later in life, while daughters will instead marry and join other families. The one-child policy compounded that situation, especially in rural areas. There, some families will abort baby girls, multiple times in some cases, until they get a boy. But Women's Rights Without Frontiers is working to fight that, with a project called the Save a Girl campaign. It's already saved over 100 baby girls in China. Little John shared a story about how her team managed to save 2 twin daughters. She explains that the pregnant mother avoided getting an ultrasound until she was very far along because she knew her mother-in-law would force her to abort the baby if it was a girl. When she finally did get the ultrasound, she found out she was carrying not 1, but 2 baby girls.
Fortunately, one of our field workers found out about her, came to her door, said, "Congratulations on your twin daughters. Girls are as good as boys, and we will give you 2 monthly stipends for a year to empower you to keep your daughters." So with that encouragement and with the money, this $50 a month, she was able to go back to her husband and her mother-in-law and say, "Look, I can't abort, I can't abandon these baby girls. They're lucky girls. Look, they're already bringing money into the family." And the girls were born, and now, of course, everybody's in love with them.
The twins are among the lucky few. While it's difficult to get firm data on the subject, academics say there are now between 30 to 60 million missing girls in China, all of them either aborted or killed right after birth. But the gender imbalance has triggered another severe problem, human trafficking.
So there are about 30 to 40 million men without wives. And this is the engine that is driving human trafficking and sexual slavery throughout China and also from the surrounding countries. And it's impossible to get a number for that because all of this is done with the greatest secrecy.
Part of the issue is the way the legal system is set up. Under Chinese law, buying a trafficked woman will land you in jail for a maximum of 3 years. Buying a panda, on the other hand, leads to a far steeper sentence, 10 years behind bars. A related case sparked outrage on Chinese social media earlier this year, when a mother of 8 was found chained to a wall. Video surfaced of the woman locked in a shabby shed in a village in northwestern China, where she had been held for decades. She's suspected to be an example of bride trafficking, another result of the one-child policy. The chained woman's case caught huge attention in China and abroad, but even the strong wave of public opinion couldn't change her fate. Shortly after she was transferred to a local mental hospital, her whereabouts became a mystery to the public. But it's not just the unborn and young facing the after effects of the one-child policy.
And we're also saving abandoned widows that I call sort of the unsung or secret victims of the one-child policy. And people don't think about how the one-child policy is affecting widows, but traditionally they were supported by a large family and they don't have a family to support them. So they are they are impoverished, they are abandoned, and a lot of them are committing suicide.
While the consequences of the one-child policy continue to take their toll, reports say one player actually benefited: the Chinese regime. According to a BBC News report, as of October 2015, the communist regime had collected over $300 billion in extra child fines. The penalties made up some of the punishments inflicted on parents who had more than one child. But despite the policy's continued impacts, there is hope. Little John says the Women's Rights Without Frontiers Coalition is making a major impact.
We're the only organization in the world that actually has boots on the ground inside of China that is actively helping save baby girls from sex-selective abortion, abandonment, and even just grinding poverty, which is endemic in the Chinese countryside, especially given the coronavirus lockdowns.
And those efforts aren't slowing down.
And U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said on Thursday that crypto asset regulations should support responsible innovation while managing risks. Matches a recent White House executive order that was well received by the crypto market. In a speech on digital assets policy, Yellen said that in many cases, regulators already have authorities that can manage crypto risks. That includes appropriate oversight of new types of intermediaries, such as digital asset exchanges.
Our regulatory frameworks should be designed to support responsible innovation while managing risks, and especially those that could disrupt the financial system and the economy.
Yellen also said that wherever possible, regulation should be, quote, tech neutral. That regulation should be guided by risks to households and businesses, not the underlying technology. With blockchain, entries are made on a distributed ledger rather than a central ledger like a balance sheet. Biden's executive order requires the Treasury and the Commerce Departments and other agencies to prepare reports on, quote, the future of money and the role cryptocurrencies will play.